That necklace doesn't belong in first class. The words didn't come with a scowl or a raised voice. They came wrapped in a smile, thin, practiced, polished, but they landed like a slap. Elijah Carter looked up. He didn't say anything. He never did when he felt the old burn rising in his chest. Instead, he touched the pendant resting on his shirt. Just 2 fingers. Gentle, almost reverent. The necklace was silver, simple, wing-shaped, worn, and it had been his father's. The flight attendant, her name tag reading Elaine, raised an eyebrow as she gestured toward it. "We try to keep this cabin elevated," she said smoothly, her tone soft, like velvet over ice. "Certain accessories send mixed messages." Elijah blinked, stunned, but still didn't speak. His mother, standing just behind him in line, leaned forward. "Excuse me?" Elaine didn't turn toward her. She kept her eyes on the boy. "I'm just suggesting a little discretion. Some passengers appreciate a more uniform atmosphere." "He's 13, Lauren Carter replied, tight-lipped. "And this is first class," Elaine answered with a nod that wasn't really a nod. It was permission disguised as dismissal. "We have expectations." Elijah looked down at his necklace again. "My dad gave this to me," he said quietly. Elaine's eyes narrowed just a fraction. Her voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. "Then your father should have known better." The gate area went still. Nobody said a word, but the silence said plenty. They stepped past her without another glance. Elijah led the way, shoulders square. Lauren followed close behind, her jaw clenched. He didn't say a word as they walked the jet bridge. Neither did she. But inside, the damage was already done. First class was as hushed and curated as always. Leather seats, gold trim, ambient lighting that somehow felt smug. Elijah slipped into 2A, right beside the window. Lauren sat next to him. The man across the aisle had AirPods in. The woman behind him carried a Birkin bag and 2 martinis worth of perfume. No one said a thing, but they all looked. At the boy, at the necklace, at what didn't fit. The pendant rested plainly over his navy shirt. It didn't gleam. It wasn't that kind of silver. It was matte, scuffed at the edges, with a shallow inscription no one but him ever noticed. "Fly beyond fear." It had been forged by his father. John Carter wasn't a soldier, but he'd flown like one. Test flights, prototypes, altitude missions for companies most people didn't even know existed. He was a quiet genius, a risk taker, a father who took his son to see launches and told him the sound of ignition was what hope sounded like. And 5 years ago, John Carter climbed into a cockpit for a routine system test and never came back. They found the necklace in the wreckage, still latched. Lauren kept it locked away until last week. 13 candles, 1 velvet box, no speech, just a whisper. "He'd want you to have this now." Elijah sat perfectly still, not angry, not embarrassed, but burning inside. He thought he'd be excited for this flight. First time in business class, not some reward, just an upgrade his mom earned through a decade of travel points. Still, a new experience. He imagined looking out the window and thinking about his dad, maybe even feeling close to him for a few quiet hours above the clouds. But now someone had looked at that necklace, and instead of seeing memory, or courage, or history, they saw something cheap, and judged him for it. In the galley, Elaine tapped her screen and scrolled the manifest. Seat 2A. Elijah Carter, minor, traveling with parent. No dietary flags, no special instructions. She frowned. He didn't look like trouble, but he didn't look like first class either. And that necklace, ugly thing. Probably from some airport gift shop. Too much sentimentality these days. People use tragedy like a ticket. Elaine had been in this job too long to fall for that look. Wide eyes and soft voices and "my dad gave me this. Please." Nicole, the younger attendant, approached behind her. "Hey, is that the kid with the necklace?" Elaine nodded curtly. "Yes, and he's already pushing the boundaries of decorum." Nicole paused. "I thought it looked kind of cool." Elaine turned, face blank. "Professionalism is about standards, Nicole. We can't lower them for every sob story." Nicole didn't answer, but her eyes drifted down the aisle to 2A. The boy wasn't fiddling with the screen or bouncing in his seat. He just sat there, quiet, composed. And the necklace, it did look familiar. Back in the cabin, Elijah stared out the window. His reflection looked older today, like someone learning how to hold pain without dropping it in public. Lauren rested her hand gently on his knee. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "You want to take it off?" He shook his head. "No." She smiled, barely. "Good." 5 minutes passed. A man near row 3 adjusted his phone subtly on the armrest, lens angled toward the boy and the woman beside him. It wasn't dramatic, but something about the energy felt tense. The clip wouldn't go viral until later, but the moment was already recording itself in people's minds. The captain announced final boarding. A few passengers rustled magazines. Others closed laptops. Elaine passed by row 2, paused. She looked at the boy again. The necklace was still there, still visible. She opened her mouth, then closed it, and kept walking. Somewhere in the pocket of her memory, a name flickered. John Carter. Why did that name ring? But she shut the thought down. Too much to do, too many appearances to maintain. But down in 2A, a boy sat with a silver wing pressed to his chest and a line in his mind echoing from years ago. "When the sky turns against you, fly anyway." The plane lifted off like it always did, steady, humming, with that soft lurch that made your stomach float for just a second. Elijah didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the clouds outside the window, arms crossed, his right hand still resting lightly over the necklace. His mother, Lauren, sat beside him in silence. She didn't grip the armrest or distract him with small talk. She just let him sit in that quiet place only kids like Elijah seemed to understand, where dignity and pain existed side by side. The wing on his chest shifted as the cabin tilted. The silver caught the cabin light, not flashy, not loud, but enough for someone 3 rows back to notice. And they did. Elaine made her rounds with the confidence of someone who had walked too many aisles to count. Everything about her was measured. The click of her heels, the tilt of her tray, the way she adjusted the collar of her uniform every time she stepped past a passenger. She was built for control, which is why she noticed it again. Him, the boy, Elijah, still in seat 2A, still not hiding that necklace. Elaine took a breath as she poured club soda into a cut crystal glass. Maybe she had been too forward at the gate, but the necklace still looked out of place. It wasn't just the metal or the cord, it was what it symbolized. Something rough, something raw, something not shaped for first class. That's what bothered her. Not the boy. Not really. But the reminder of something unpolished in a place where everything was supposed to gleam. Nicole stepped out from the galley, tucking her notepad into her apron. She'd been on enough flights to know when something was off, not just technically, but emotionally. And something was off here. She had seen the exchange at the gate from a few paces away. She saw the way Elijah held that necklace, the way his mother didn't defend him loudly, but watched him like he was doing something braver than shouting. As she passed row 2, Nicole slowed. Elijah didn't look up, but his necklace was clearly visible now, resting over his chest. She read the engraving. 3 words: "Fly beyond fear." Her steps halted just for half a breath. She knew that phrase. Back in the galley, Nicole quietly pulled out her phone and typed the words into a search bar. Not just the phrase. Fly beyond fear plus necklace plus pilot plus Carter. A result popped up. An old news article, dated 5 years back. Test pilot John Carter honored posthumously after tragic prototype crash. The article showed a photo. John Carter shaking hands with a man in uniform. Standing beside them, a silver wing-shaped pendant in Carter's hand. Nicole stared at it. There it was. The same necklace, the same words, the same shape. She scrolled down. John Carter, a decorated test pilot for SkyTech Aviation, was one of only 3 civilians ever trained under Colonel Mark Foster's personal mentorship program. Mark Foster. Her eyes widened. She looked up toward the cabin. Elaine's last name was Foster. Elaine stood near the front lavatory, tidying napkins on a tray table that didn't need tidying. Her mind kept flicking between the boy, the necklace, and a memory she couldn't quite place. Nicole approached slowly. "Elaine," she said carefully. Elaine didn't turn. "There's something you should see." Still no movement. Nicole held out the phone. "Does this name mean anything to you?" "John Carter." Elaine turned. She stared at the screen. She blinked once, twice. Then her jaw stiffened. "That was one of Mark's students," she said. Her voice wasn't surprised. It was restrained. Nicole nodded. "That's Elijah's dad." Elaine's face didn't move for a beat. Then she said quietly, "That necklace?" Nicole nodded again. "He's wearing it." Back in 2A, Elijah sat quietly while his mother pulled a blanket from the storage cubby. She laid it gently across his lap, her hand pausing on his knee just a second longer than necessary. He didn't speak, but he knew she was watching. He always knew. 2 rows behind, a man pulled out his phone. He hadn't meant to film anything, but something about that boy had stayed with him since the boarding line. The clip he recorded, Elaine's voice, the line about standards, the pause before the boy said, "My dad gave this to me," was only 30 seconds long, but it said everything. He clicked post. Elaine remained in the galley, staring at the closed door of the cockpit like it might offer answers. She didn't remember the boy's name at first, but she remembered Mark talking about a student. "He's got a stillness," he'd said, "like a pilot born in silence." She remembered the pride on his face, the way he'd crafted that necklace himself, leftover titanium from an old aircraft project, etched in the base with a phrase he'd carried since basic training, "Fly beyond fear." And now that necklace was around the neck of a boy she had humiliated, publicly, deliberately, as if it meant nothing. Elaine swallowed, then exhaled. Her hand trembled. Nicole leaned in. "What are you going to do?" Elaine shook her head. "I don't know." In the cabin, the lights dimmed for the in-flight meal. Passengers unfolded tray tables, adjusted footrests, flipped through movie menus. Elijah didn't move. He sat with his tray up, his eyes on the pendant in his hands. Lauren gently reached over. "Want to eat something?" He shook his head. She smiled sadly. "You know, your dad once refused to eat on a 12-hour flight. Said the food didn't matter when the sky looked like that." Elijah turned, following her gaze out the window. Clouds. Endless, golden, rolling clouds. Like sand dunes in heaven. He held the necklace tight. In the galley, Nicole checked her phone again. The clip had hit 20,000 views. 30 minutes. No hashtags. No caption. Just raw truth. And the comment section was already filling. Disgusting how she treated him. "That boy's father died flying for us. The necklace is worth more than that seat. Fire her!" Elaine leaned back against the bulkhead wall, her arms crossed tightly. She'd built her career on certainty. She'd controlled cabins full of screaming infants, entitled CEOs, drunk celebrities. But she couldn't control what was happening now. And for the first time in 20 years, she wasn't sure she deserved to. At row 2A, Elijah looked down at the necklace again. He wasn't angry. He wasn't crying. But the silence around him had changed. Not just quiet. Charged. Alive. Like the cabin itself was listening now. Elaine had stood in this aisle more times than she could count. She could walk from galley to cockpit with her eyes closed. She knew every latch, every panel, every ding from the overhead call lights. But now, standing just 2 rows behind the boy, she suddenly didn't know where to put her hands. They hovered awkwardly near the service cart, then fell uselessly to her sides. The pendant still hung outside his shirt. He hadn't hidden it. He hadn't tucked it in. He hadn't lashed out or demanded an apology or even met her eyes. And somehow, that hurt more than if he had. Elaine had seen passengers blow up over spilled drinks, delayed takeoffs, or bad champagne. But this boy? He carried something heavier than that. He carried stillness, and that stillness made her uneasy in a way she couldn't name. She turned, forcing herself back into motion, moving down the aisle like nothing had shifted. Her tray clinked gently with untouched club sodas. Her shoes, usually silent, suddenly sounded louder against the flooring. She needed something to do, a task, a reason. But she kept glancing at the necklace. That wing. That cursed, familiar wing. Nicole stood near the galley, folding napkins that didn't need folding. She watched Elaine walk past the boy again without saying a word. "Elle," she said softly when Elaine returned. Elaine didn't meet her eyes. "You need to talk to him." Elaine shook her head. "Now's not the time." Nicole tilted her head. "Then when? After the landing? After the video goes viral?" "It already has." Elaine closed her eyes. Of course, she knew. Passengers whispered more than usual. The man in 3D had watched his phone the whole flight. A woman in 1A kept glancing back at row 2 like she was waiting for a second act. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a moment. And it was growing. Elijah sat still. He hadn't moved since the meal, hadn't touched the food tray, hadn't asked for anything. But he wasn't asleep, not even close. He watched the sky and held the pendant. His mother sat quietly beside him, her hands folded on her lap. She hadn't spoken to Elaine since the boarding gate, not once, but her silence was louder than shouting. It said, "You saw a child grieving and you called it out of place. You saw memory and called it tacky. You saw love and called it cheap." Elaine picked up the intercom handset in the galley. She didn't call the cockpit. She just held it for a second, like a lifeline. Then she slowly put it down. She turned to Nicole. "I trained under Mark Foster." Nicole blinked. "I know." Elaine's voice softened. "He designed that necklace himself. Said it was meant to remind people that fear was fuel, not a wall." She swallowed. "He gave it to John Carter the day John got accepted into Skytech's test pilot program. He said John had a quiet way of leading. He didn't need to talk loud to be heard." Nicole said nothing. She didn't need to. Elaine was unraveling on her own. Elaine stepped forward, back into the aisle, back into the space she knew too well. But this time, her feet felt heavy. Her chest felt hollow. She stopped beside row 2. Elijah looked up, not surprised, not curious, just present. His mother turned, slowly. Elaine stood there a second too long before she spoke. "Mr. Carter," she began, forcing the words out like they weighed more than they should. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Elijah's head tilted slightly. He didn't answer, but he didn't look away. Lauren spoke instead. "You can speak here." Elaine nodded, once. "Of course." She inhaled, and faltered, because now that she stood there, all the speeches she rehearsed in her head about decorum, professionalism, policy, they meant nothing. None of those words could touch what she had done. So instead, she said, very softly, "I knew your father." Elijah blinked. Lauren sat up straighter. Elaine continued, "I was married to the man who trained him, Mark Foster. He talked about John Carter often. He said he had this steadiness, that he was calm under pressure and kind when no one was watching." She looked at the necklace. "And that pendant was made in our garage. Mark spent weeks shaping it." It was the last thing he ever made with his hands. Her voice broke just barely. And when I saw it today, I forgot what it meant. Elijah didn't speak. He didn't nod or move, but something shifted in his eyes. Elaine continued. I saw a boy, and I judged. I saw pain, and I thought it was performance. And for that, She paused. I'm not just sorry. She looked down at her hand, then back up. I was wrong. The silence that followed was thick, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything that had gone unsaid since that first moment at the gate. Elijah finally spoke. One sentence. Most people don't say that out loud. Elaine felt tears sting her eyes. Your father did, she whispered. Every time he made a mistake in training, he owned it, and he got better. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out something small. A photograph, creased at the corners, slightly faded. She handed it to him. Elijah took it. It was a photo of Mark Foster shaking John Carter's hand with that very pendant between them. The boy stared at it, long, silent, then folded it neatly and placed it inside his pocket. Elaine stood there. No applause, no dramatic music, just a shift in the air, a recognition. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a flight attendant delivering service. She felt like a person making peace. As she turned to leave, Elijah said one last thing. He used to say this necklace didn't help him fly better. Elaine turned back, but it reminded him why he wanted to. She nodded, lips pressed tight. Then she walked back to the galley, hands trembling. Nicole watched her come in. Well, Elaine exhaled. I said what I needed to say. Nicole smiled gently. He didn't need much. Elaine shook her head. No, just the truth. In row 2A, Lauren reached over and brushed Elijah's hair gently from his face. You okay? He nodded, then opened the photo again. He stared at it for a long time and smiled. Not big, not bright, but real. The cabin lights dimmed to a dusky amber as the plane sliced through its cruise altitude, smooth and steady. Somewhere above the Pacific Ocean, between the hum of engines and the occasional clink of glassware, a different kind of turbulence was forming. It wasn't in the sky. It was online. Seat 3D was quiet now, but the man occupying it had his phone tilted just slightly off the tray, screen still lit. He'd posted the video 20 minutes ago with a simple caption. Flight attendant tells grieving boy his necklace doesn't belong in first class. No hashtags, no tagging, just the moment itself. And that moment was spreading fast. 20,000 views had become 78,000. Comments piled in by the second, dozens of screenshots, hundreds of retweets. Passenger accounts were now posting their own versions of what they'd seen. Some filmed Elaine's apology, some zoomed in on the necklace. Some simply wrote things like, her tone said everything. He didn't need to shout. He was already louder than her. That necklace carries more class than the whole cabin. In the forward galley, Elaine leaned against the wall, arms folded, but the stillness didn't calm her. Nicole stepped in from the cabin, her eyes serious. It's everywhere now. Elaine didn't ask what it was. She knew. Nicole held up her phone. The video now had over 120,000 views. Elaine exhaled through her nose. How bad? Nicole hesitated. The airline's public inbox is being flooded. So is their Twitter account. There's already a petition calling for an apology or termination. Elaine closed her eyes, not because she was surprised, because she wasn't. Back in row 2, Elijah sat with the photo still folded neatly in his pocket. He hadn't touched the in-flight screen. He hadn't asked for another drink. He simply sat, alert but still. The kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable. The kind of stillness that taught people how to listen. Lauren Carter watched her son carefully. She had held her tongue long enough, for his sake. But now it was time someone said something as a mother. She reached over, placed her hand lightly on his wrist. Sweetheart, she said quietly. "I need to go talk to someone. Are you okay here for a moment?" He nodded, no hesitation. Lauren stood, stepped out into the aisle, and made her way toward the galley. Her steps were steady, her face calm, but her spine? Steel. Elaine looked up as Lauren approached. The moment their eyes met, everything else in the galley seemed to freeze. Elaine opened her mouth, unsure what to say, but Lauren beat her to it, with a voice that wasn't angry, but devastatingly clear. "You judged a boy in public for wearing a piece of his father, and now the world's watching." Elaine didn't argue. Lauren's voice softened, but it didn't lose its edge. "I've seen people insult children before, but rarely with a smile, and almost never so calmly." Elaine looked down. Lauren pressed on. "Do you know what it cost him to wear that necklace today? To step on this plane? It wasn't an accessory. It was a memory with a pulse." Elaine finally met her eyes. "I know that now." Lauren didn't let up. "I believe you, but knowing now doesn't undo the way he sat for 2 hours thinking he didn't belong." A pause. Then Elaine whispered, "I'm sorry." Lauren nodded, but she didn't smile. "I accept your apology, but this isn't about me, or even just Elijah. You weren't just wrong about him. You showed a whole cabin what judgment looks like in uniform." Elaine's throat tightened. "I've given 30 years to this airline." Lauren didn't blink. "Then you know better than anyone. One moment on the wrong side of a story can rewrite everything." Nicole stepped in gently. "I just got word," she said, holding out her phone. "Corporate flagged the video. They've issued a temporary statement saying the incident is under review." Elaine read the headline. "Sky Sierra responds to viral video of flight attendant confronting grieving teen over necklace." Her name hadn't been included yet, but she knew how these things worked. By landing, it would be. Captain Morales came on the intercom just then, voice smooth, reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent shortly. Please ensure your seat backs and trays are in the upright position." His voice was steady as always, but for Elaine, it sounded like Judgment Day. She stepped out into the aisle once more, this time moving slowly, deliberately. Passengers didn't speak, but they watched, not with hatred. Worse, with recognition. Recognition that someone had failed, and it hadn't been the boy in seat 2A. Elaine stopped beside Elijah again. He looked up, his eyes calm. Still, but this time, not distant. She crouched beside him. Her knees cracked slightly as she knelt. She didn't care. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "But I need you to know, I remembered too late, and I'll carry that." Elijah held her gaze. Then, for the first time, he said something more than a line. He said a truth. "My dad used to say flying doesn't make you brave. Landing does." Elaine felt her breath catch. "That necklace," he added, "it's not heavy because of what it's made of. It's heavy because of who gave it to me, and who gave it to him." She nodded, slowly, then stood up, and didn't say another word. As the plane descended, the buzz in the cabin was quiet, respectful. Not forced, not scripted, organic. Elaine didn't make final announcements. Nicole did. Passengers began to pack their bags. But no one forgot what had happened, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. The plane touched down smoothly. Applause didn't break out, but glances did. Toward the boy, toward the necklace, toward the lesson. As they taxied to the gate, Lauren turned to her son. "Do you want me to say anything else?" He shook his head. "You already did," he said. She smiled, for the first time that day. In the terminal, as they waited for their luggage, Elijah checked his phone for the first time. Nicole had quietly airdropped him a screenshot. It showed the video's current view count, 311,000, but it was the top comment that made him pause. That boy didn't speak loud, but he made all of us hear him. He stared at it, then powered off the phone, and just held the necklace, not to explain it, not to defend it, just to remember. The gate at Tokyo Haneda was all polished steel and sterile silence. The kind of silence that feels earned after a long flight, after long thoughts. Passengers trickled out of the jet bridge like ghosts returning to Earth. Elaine Foster walked behind them, not slower than usual, but not with the same precision either. Her shoulders didn't square like they normally did. Her suitcase rolled behind her, but the click of its wheels didn't have the same bite. Her phone buzzed in her blazer pocket before she even reached the terminal doors. She didn't check it right away, because she already knew. The message was simple. We need to speak. 9 a.m. Tokyo time, HR plus communications. It was from Sky Sierra's regional VP. No emojis, no warmth. Elaine stared at it for a long time before clicking her phone off and slipping it back in her pocket. Nicole walked beside her, suitcase in hand, expression unreadable. You want company? She asked gently. Elaine gave her a small shake of the head. Thanks, Nick. I need to walk this one alone. Across the terminal, Elijah and Lauren Carter sat near baggage claim, their carry-ons beside them. Elijah had just finished watching a short video on his phone, a news anchor recapping the viral moment mid-flight, already rebranded with a hashtag, #TheNecklaceFlight. He closed the screen. He didn't need to watch it again. He was in it. But what caught him was the comment section. People were writing essays about dignity, about grief, about what first class is really supposed to mean. One line stuck with him. That boy didn't teach the world to be better. He reminded it that kindness still costs nothing. His mom returned with bottled water and sat beside him. They're covering it in Europe now, she said, handing him a bottle. BBC, Euronews, some travel blogs. He nodded, then looked up and asked quietly, Is it weird that I don't want anyone in trouble? Lauren paused. No, honey. That just means you're the only adult in the room. Elaine reached her hotel room, threw her blazer onto the chair, and sat on the edge of the bed. She stared at the wall. She wasn't afraid of losing her job. She'd built her whole life on order, on structure, on the belief that if you just followed the rules long enough, life wouldn't fall apart. But in the moment that boy said, "My dad gave this to me," something cracked. Not outside, inside. And now that crack was wide open. The video had passed 500,000 views. Her name wasn't trending yet, but people were already identifying her. One comment thread had figured it out based on her badge, uniform, and flight number. Others shared screenshots of her past years of service. And someone, she didn't even know who, posted an old image of her late husband, Colonel Mark Foster, standing next to John Carter, with the caption, "Funny how the man who trained heroes married someone who forgot how to spot one. That one hurt most." Because it wasn't cruel, it was true. 9 out of 8 a.m. came faster than she wanted. She sat in front of the hotel room laptop, her Sky Sierra login glowing on the screen. 2 executives appeared in the Zoom call, HR and public relations. They were polite, measured, but not friendly. "Elaine, thank you for joining," one said. "We've all seen the footage. The video has been verified. The comments from passengers have been logged. We'd like to hear from you directly before this proceeds further." Elaine didn't ask what this meant. She just nodded, then spoke clearly. "I said something to a young boy that I shouldn't have. Not because it was against policy, but because it was against decency. I didn't know who he was, but it doesn't matter. I judged grief as if it were theater, and I did it in uniform." The screen was silent for a moment. Then the HR rep spoke. "That's the most honest answer we've heard in 3 years." Elaine blinked. "But," he continued, "it won't shield you from impact." She nodded again. "I'm not asking for it to." Back in the city, Elijah and Lauren stepped into a quiet cafe across from the National Aviation Museum. They were due to attend a small tribute ceremony for John Carter in 2 hours. But first, they needed coffee. As they waited for their drinks, a young woman, Japanese, mid-20s, approached them hesitantly. "Are you from the video?" she asked Elijah. Lauren turned sharply, but Elijah just nodded. "Yes." The woman bowed slightly. "Your father must be very proud." He didn't know what to say. She reached into her bag and placed a folded origami crane on the table. "In my country, cranes are for peace. I hope you carry it in your pocket." He smiled, not wide, but soft. "Thank you," he said. Elaine sat in the hotel lobby hours later, still in uniform, but without the confidence it used to bring. She hadn't been suspended yet, but her next few flights had been reassigned for internal review, and a formal apology was being drafted. She had two choices: sign it and keep flying, or resign and speak on her own terms. She looked down at the photo Elijah had returned to her, a younger version of her husband shaking hands with John Carter, and she thought, maybe the apology should come from me, not from legal. That evening, she opened a blank email. To corporate comms, subject, suggested statement, Foster. She began typing. To the Carter family, and to anyone who's ever carried something sacred into a room that made them feel small. I failed you, not because of what I said, but because I didn't recognize who you were before I said it. That's on me. I forgot that first class isn't a cabin. It's a standard, and dignity should be the ticket. I hope, wherever you are, Elijah, you never tuck that necklace in, not for anyone, especially not someone like me. She hit send, then finally, closed the laptop, and cried. Not because she feared what came next, but because for the first time in a long time, she knew she'd landed in the right place. The clip hit 1 million views at 10:42 a.m. By 11:15, it was on CNN's afternoon rotation. By noon, The View had picked it up. By 1 p.m., Sky Sierra's PR team was in full-blown containment mode. The title that ran across the ticker screen read simply, Flight Attendant Faces Backlash After Confronting Grieving Teen Over Necklace in First Class. But what people kept sharing wasn't the headline. It was the moment Elijah Carter looked up and said, "My dad gave this to me." And the reply, "Then he should have known better." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. And that's what made it unforgettable. Elaine Foster sat on the edge of her hotel bed in a plain t-shirt, hair undone, watching herself get replayed across 3 networks. Not as a villain. Worse, as a case study. The segment on Good Morning America was the hardest to watch. They'd invited a grief counselor, a travel ethicist, and a retired flight attendant. The grief counselor said, "Grief wears many faces, but to belittle someone's way of carrying it, that's not just unkind, that's harmful." The retired attendant added, "You're not just a server in the sky, you're a guardian of space, and that means you don't get to judge what people carry, emotionally or physically." Elaine muted the screen. She'd seen enough. At that same hour, across town, Elijah stood behind a small podium at the Aviation Tribute Hall inside Tokyo's Aerospace Memorial. He wore a simple navy blazer. The silver necklace was out in full view. No one asked him to hide it this time. The crowd was quiet, not large, but present. Scientists, engineers, pilots, and a few journalists from the U.S. He'd been asked to speak on behalf of his father, John Carter, as the late engineer was posthumously inducted into the International Aeronautics Hall of Merit. The MC had read the formal citation. Now it was Elijah's turn. He stepped up, cleared his throat, and began. "I'm not a pilot, I'm not an engineer, and I'm only 13. A soft smile from the audience. "But I know something about lift." He looked down, fingers brushing the pendant. "This necklace was made from titanium left over from a prototype my dad helped build. His mentor, Colonel Mark Foster, gave it to him. They called it the wing." He paused. "When my dad died, they found it still clasped around his neck. A beat. And now it's mine. The silence was reverent. You could hear a chair creak at the back. I wore this on a plane yesterday, and someone told me it didn't belong, that it sent the wrong message. He looked up now. But I think it sent the right one, because what we carry, when it's given in love, can never be out of place. Lauren sat in the front row, eyes full. The crowd rose, slowly, quietly, but fully. Elaine saw the live stream. She didn't cry, not until he said, "Because what we carry, when it's given in love, can never be out of place." She paused the video and whispered to no one, "You carried it better than I ever could." Later that evening, Elijah's speech appeared in full on ABC's site. The comments exploded. "He made more sense in 3 minutes than most politicians do in a year. That boy didn't cancel anyone. He corrected the whole room. Grace is when you give back dignity to someone who tried to take yours." By nightfall, someone had started a petition, not to fire Elaine, but to invite her to speak with Elijah at a conference on grief and dignity in public life. It had 28,000 signatures by midnight. Back in Alabama, the Carter family mailbox filled with handwritten letters, some from pilots, some from widows, some from strangers who had just felt something watching the story unfold. Lauren read a few aloud over breakfast. One line stuck with Elijah. "You reminded me that sometimes the quiet ones carry the loudest truths." He folded that one and kept it in the same pocket as the photo of his dad and Colonel Foster. Elaine returned to the States 3 days later. She'd signed the apology statement, but she'd also made a request. No statement unless Elijah agrees to it. No spin, no saving face, just the truth. Sky Sierra had been reluctant, but the story had already evolved. Because Elijah hadn't asked for her job. He hadn't asked for attention. He'd just kept wearing the necklace. And that silence had become a statement. 1 week later, a special segment aired on national television. Grace at 38,000 feet, a flight that taught us something grounded. It featured a split interview. Elaine in one chair, Elijah in another. Not to debate, not to defend, just to talk. Elaine spoke first. "I forgot how to see people, especially the quiet ones. I let my need for control cloud my compassion. And a boy who'd already lost more than I ever knew reminded me what it means to land with grace." Then Elijah. "I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say. I just knew what not to do." The interviewer smiled gently, which was hurt back. They didn't hug on camera. They didn't pose for photos. But when the segment ended and the lights dimmed, Elaine walked over and held out her hand. Elijah took it. That was enough, for both of them. Elaine Foster stood in front of her bathroom mirror, her Sky Sierra uniform hanging neatly behind the door, pressed and ready. The blazer was immaculate. The heels were shined. Her wings, gold, polished, were clipped perfectly to the lapel. She looked at them for a long moment, then unpinned them and placed them quietly on the counter. 27 years in the sky, 12 different aircraft models, over 5 million miles logged, and this would be her final walk down a jet bridge. The official resignation email had gone out the night before. It was short. No theatrics, no defense. Just this: "After decades of service, I have decided to retire from my position at Sky Sierra. I leave not in bitterness, but in growth. Thank you for the skies." Elaine Foster. There had been responses, of course. Some supportive, some cold. But one reply stuck with her. It was from the airline's CEO. "What we carry with us defines who we are. Thank you for choosing to carry this moment with accountability." Elaine didn't walk away because of the video. She walked away because she couldn't serve passengers without remembering that boy. Because if she ever forgot him again, even for a second, she knew she'd become someone she couldn't respect. 2 days later, she stood outside the Lexington Center for Professional Ethics in Aviation. The annual summit was usually quiet. Industry folk, union reps, HR execs, a few veteran pilots. But this year, the press was there. Because Elaine Foster had accepted the invitation to speak. She hadn't taken media requests, hadn't posted, hadn't rehearsed. She was just there. Plain black dress. No makeup, no badge. Just a woman who used to believe policy mattered more than people. The stage was modest. Elaine stepped up and looked at the audience. Then she began. I once told a child that something precious to him didn't belong. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I just said it with a smile. And somehow, that made it worse. A murmur in the room. Heads nodded. Because I didn't just humiliate him. I did it professionally, and I almost got away with it. She paused. But he didn't fight me. He didn't post. He didn't even ask for justice. He just sat there, calm, still, wearing a piece of his father and letting me face myself. Elaine exhaled. I left the airline because I realized I could still fly, but I couldn't land. Not with peace, not with truth. She looked out at them, her peers, her former colleagues. So I came here to say this. If someone carries grief into your aisle, don't ask them to hide it. Ask yourself why you stopped recognizing it. The room was silent, not because they disagreed, but because they knew she was right. After the panel, a flight attendant in her 20s approached Elaine. She didn't introduce herself right away. She just asked, "Was it hard, walking away?" Elaine smiled. Not nearly as hard as staying and pretending I hadn't changed. Meanwhile, in Alabama, Elijah Carter sat at the kitchen table, quietly peeling the edge of a sticker from a notebook. His mother set a mug of cocoa beside him and sat. They asked again, she said. Elijah didn't look up. Who? The magazine. They want to feature you. Front cover, the boy who taught us to listen. He raised an eyebrow. Sounds a little dramatic, he said. Lauren chuckled. It is. A pause. He looked up at her. Did I really teach anyone anything? She reached over, touched the chain at his collar. You reminded them. A few hours later, a clip from Elaine's speech hit social media. It wasn't long, just a 90-second soundbite. I thought I was protecting the cabin standards, but really, I was just protecting my comfort. I asked a child to hide his grief because I couldn't face mine. It went viral within a day, but not because it was controversial, because it was honest. Because it was honest. News anchors didn't yell over it. They nodded. Past passengers shared their own stories, not about Elaine, but about times they had been made to feel small in silence. Suddenly, the conversation had changed, from outrage to reflection. Elaine never returned to flying, but she found herself invited to places she never imagined. Ethics panels, grief conferences, aviation schools. She always started the same way. I used to know how to recite policy. Now I try to remember people. And as for Elijah, he didn't become a public speaker. He didn't join social media. He went back to school. Quiet, kind, steady, but he kept the necklace outside his shirt. Always. And no one ever asked him to hide it again. If someone told you to tuck away the one thing that connects you to someone you've lost, would you hide it? Or would you wear it anyway? Tell us below, because your story might remind someone else that their grief still belongs. A week after Elaine Foster's speech aired, Elijah Carter received a plain manila envelope in the mail. No return address, no stamp, just his name, handwritten in cursive, like a signature from another time. It arrived on a Tuesday. He almost missed it in the stack of bills and flyers on the kitchen counter. Lauren noticed it first. Honey, she said, handing it to him with a look that was both curious and cautious. This one's different. He turned it over in his hands. There was something familiar in the way the paper felt, like the old notebooks his dad used to carry into the garage during long prototype sessions. Worn, practical, personal. He opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a folded sheet of thick paper, linen texture, old school. The kind you write with a fountain pen. No typed words, just ink. Blue, neat, a little shaky. Dear Elijah, I wasn't sure I had the right to write this, but my heart wouldn't let me stay silent. You don't know me, but I knew your father. Not well, but well enough to remember the way he stood when he was proud, and the way he looked at people when they didn't think they were being seen. He trained under my husband. They weren't just pilot and mentor. They were friends. When your father died, I didn't go to the service. I was too afraid of what grief might make me feel. I stayed away, and I've regretted it every year since. When I saw you that day on the plane, I didn't see your father at first. I saw the past I tried to forget, and instead of honoring it, I judged it. But what you did, how you sat there, how you carried that necklace, how you never raised your voice, it reminded me of both of them. Mark would have called it command without noise. You have it. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to return something to you. Something that belonged to your father. Something I kept when I shouldn't have. It's waiting for you. No pressure, no obligation. Just an open door. With respect, E.F. Elijah read it twice. Then a third time. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in the front pocket of his notebook. Lauren didn't press him. She just poured him a glass of water and sat beside him in silence, as she'd learned to do. The next morning, Elijah made the call. Elaine answered on the second ring. Hello? It's Elijah. Her breath hitched, audible through the line. Thank you for calling. He didn't ask questions. She didn't explain further. They set a time, a place. 2 days later, Elijah and Lauren drove to a small home on the outskirts of the city. A modest place with a white fence and a rose bush that had clearly seen better seasons. Elaine greeted them at the door with a sweater folded over her arm and a notebook pressed to her chest. She didn't invite them in. Instead, she asked, "Would you mind walking?" Elijah nodded. They walked down the street, past a few sleepy porches and a rusted mailbox. No cameras, no reporters, no eyes but their own. At the end of the block sat a little bench under a tree, its leaves starting to brown at the edges. Elaine reached into her notebook and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. Black, scuffed at the corners. No name on the cover. She handed it to Elijah. This was your father's. He used to write flight notes in it, but not the kind about wind speed or engine curves. The kind about people. Elijah opened it slowly. The first page read, "What you carry into the cockpit matters more than what you carry in the cargo hold." He blinked, turned the page. Dozens of entries. Handwritten, personal, thoughtful. Notes about co-pilots, mentors, mechanics he admired. Even a page titled, "Cadet E.F., Unshakable in Crosswinds." Elaine smiled. That one's about me, I think. They sat for a long while without speaking. Then Elaine said quietly, I didn't know what to do with it after he died. I held on to it like a selfish bookmark. Elijah shook his head. You kept it safe. That's not selfish. She turned to him, eyes glistening. You're a lot like him. Monday came with overcast skies and the smell of pencil shavings and wet backpacks. Elijah walked into homeroom like he always did. Quiet, hoodie half-zipped, journal tucked under his arm. He didn't expect anyone to mention the assembly again. Most big moments came and went like that in middle school. Loud for a second, forgotten the next. But when he sat down, he noticed a folded paper on his desk. Plain white. No name. Just written in thin blue ink. Thank you. I never told anyone about my brother. He turned around. The desk behind him was empty, but he already knew who had left it. Micah Jennings had been in the same class since 3rd grade. Tall, always wore a zip-up jacket even in summer. Never raised his hand, sat in the back, never got called on unless a teacher was desperate. People didn't tease Micah. They didn't see him enough to tease. He just existed, like one of those background kids in yearbook photos, until now. At lunch, Elijah found Micah sitting alone, as usual, reading a sci-fi novel with one hand and stabbing a string cheese with the other. Elijah sat across from him. Micah looked up, surprised, but didn't say anything. Elijah pulled out his journal. Not the original. He didn't carry that anymore. He had a second one now, a blank one, for what came next. He placed it gently on the table and waited. Micah slowly set his book down, then whispered, "He was 15. My brother." Elijah nodded, letting him take his time. Micah stared at the table. "He died in a fire 3 years ago." Elijah said nothing. Micah's voice dropped even lower. "I was the one who found the necklace in his room. After, I kept it." Elijah looked up. Micah unzipped the top of his jacket. Inside, under his collarbone, hung a thin chain with a small circular pendant, charred a little on one edge. He wore it every day. I didn't even know why. After he died, I wore it under my shirt. Never told anyone. Elijah didn't reach for it, didn't ask to see. He just said, "You don't have to hide it." Micah shrugged. "I don't want people asking about it." "That's okay." Micah looked up. "But I don't want to hide it anymore either." That afternoon, Micah stayed after school. He walked into Ms. Saunders' office with a note in his hand. It said, "Can I share something at next week's assembly? It's about people who leave too early." By the following Friday, word had spread. Elijah's reading had done something no one expected. It opened a door. Now other kids were standing in line behind it. Micah stood backstage, knees shaking, paper in hand. Elijah stood beside him. "You don't have to read every word," Elijah said. "I want to." "Then you will." When Micah stepped out, the room didn't fall silent the way it had for Elijah. At first, there were whispers. Then he spoke. "I don't talk a lot. You probably didn't notice me until last week." A few nervous chuckles. "But I lost someone too, and I've been trying to carry it quiet. Turns out, I was just carrying it alone." He lifted the pendant from under his shirt. No big gesture, just enough for people to see. "This belonged to my brother. I wear it now, because love doesn't stop just because someone's not here." This time, no one laughed, no one shifted, and when he walked off stage, the applause was quiet, like a promise being kept. In the hallway after assembly, something strange happened. 3 kids stopped Micah, not to ask questions, but to say, "Me too." One had lost her grandma, one a cousin. One just said, "I don't talk about it either." Micah nodded. Didn't say much, but he smiled. Not wide, just enough. That evening, Elijah opened his new journal and wrote on the first page, "The desk behind mine has a story too." He didn't write Micah's name. He didn't have to. Lauren walked by his room and saw the notebook open. "You writing again?" she asked gently. He nodded. Someone else needed a page. She smiled, leaned against the doorway. "You starting another chain?" Elijah shrugged. "Maybe. I think everyone's carrying something." Lauren walked in, kissed the top of his head. "You just helped them remember they don't have to carry it alone." A few days later, Ms. Saunders hung a new board in the school's front hallway. At the top, in black letters, it said, "What we carry." Below it, dozens of small paper shapes, stars, feathers, circles, each with a name or a message. No explanation, no press, just a quiet place where kids could post memories, names, drawings, whatever helped them keep the love visible. Micah pinned his brother's initials inside a flame. Elijah pinned a small silver wing, and no one told them to take it down. It started with an email. Simple subject line, "I worked with your dad." The message had no introduction, no sign-off, just 3 lines. He kept a red spiral notebook. Inside, page 67 changed how we solved for drag vector loss in low orbit. You should have it. Attached was a scanned image. Rough sketch, half equations, half scribbles. And in the corner, a familiar signature. J. Carter. Elijah stared at the screen. He hadn't thought much about his dad's work. Not beyond the stories, the flights, the pendant. But now, here it was. Real, technical, referenced in an aerospace firm's internal archive. He turned to Lauren, who stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing blueberries. "Mom?" She dried her hands and walked over. He showed her the email. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, I remember that notebook." She took a breath, long and slow. He used to say it wasn't for work, that it was for thinking sideways. Later that night, Elijah pulled out his father's black journal, the one Elaine had returned. He flipped to the back, where a pocket folder was stitched into the lining. Tucked inside, a folded page with red ink bleeding through. He opened it. Page 67. His breath caught. It matched, scribbles and all. At school the next day, Elijah brought a copy to his science teacher, Mr. Halpern, who used to work for a drone design company before switching careers. Halpern examined it carefully. "This is advanced, not high school advanced, NASA advanced." He looked up, adjusting his glasses. "You're telling me your dad did this on his own?" Elijah shrugged. "I think so." Halpern leaned back, quiet for a long moment. "I'll be honest, I'd kill to sit in on one conversation he had with von Braun." Word spread quietly. A week later, Elijah received a package in the mail. No label, just a return address from Pasadena, California. Inside, a framed schematic print. His father's sketch. Below it, a plaque. Contributed to 2013 SkyTech Orbital Stability Project. In memory of John Carter. Elijah stared at it for a long time. He didn't cry, but he smiled. Because now his father wasn't just someone he missed. He was someone whose thoughts lived on. That night, Lauren brought out a small box from the back of the closet. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside were old flash drives, conference badges, and letters addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Carter from names Elijah didn't recognize. Engineers, designers, flight control techs. They all had one thing in common. They said thank you for ideas, for mentorship, for stillness in chaos. Elijah pulled out one letter, handwritten on plain yellow legal paper. "Your husband once told me that every good design starts with asking who you're trying to protect. It's why I stayed in aerospace." Elijah didn't know what to do with the information. He didn't want to become an engineer, not yet. Maybe not ever. But he felt something shift. Not in what he wanted to be, but in what he belonged to. A legacy of quiet builders, of men who designed wings not to be seen, but to hold others safely above the storm. He added a new page to his journal. At the top, he wrote, "I didn't inherit his job. I inherited his questions." Gate B-18 was quiet that morning. Early flights always were. Soft-shoed passengers, coffee cups steaming in slow lines, boarding calls whispered through intercoms still half asleep. Elijah Carter sat by the window, knees drawn up slightly, a leather-bound journal resting on his lap. He wasn't traveling with his mother this time. This was his first flight alone. One ticket, one carry-on, and one item that never left his neck. The pendant sat against his chest as usual, but lighter somehow. Not because it had changed, but because he had. He'd worn it when he was told it didn't belong. He wore it when he was told he did. Now, he wore it because it simply was his. The boarding announcement played softly. Pre-boarding for unaccompanied minors. He stood, steady. The flight attendant at the gate smiled. "You must be Mr. Carter." Elijah nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She glanced at her clipboard, then back at him. "First time flying solo?" He hesitated, then smiled. "First time officially." Seat 3A, window. The sky outside was beginning to lighten, hints of gold touching the edges of cloud like promises. Elijah placed the journal on the tray table and buckled in. The woman in the seat next to him looked over, gave him a warm, distracted smile, then returned to her crossword. Elijah opened the journal, flipped past pages. Words from his dad. Quotes from teachers. Micah's story. His own. Then a blank page. He uncapped a pen and started writing. Dear Dad, today I'm flying on my own. I've got your journal, your necklace, and your quiet. I used to think carrying something meant holding it tight, but maybe it just means not letting go of where it came from. I met people, heard stories, lost some things, kept others. But the one thing I never lost was you. Turns out, the best part of flying isn't the sky. It's what you take with you. The captain's voice crackled through the cabin. Welcome aboard Flight 202. Weather's clear. We'll be taking off shortly. The engines hummed. Elijah closed the journal, held it for a beat, then looked out the window as the runway began to move. The plane lifted. He didn't flinch, just watched, like he'd done as a child. Only this time he understood what he was watching, not just takeoff, but continuity. An hour later, the woman next to him glanced at the journal as Elijah flipped through it again. That's a nice notebook, she said casually. Elijah smiled. It used to be my dad's. She paused, then nodded. He must have been a good man. Elijah looked back down at the page, still warm from his hand, still empty enough to hold more. He was, he said. When the plane landed, he didn't rush. He waited, stepped off slowly, and when he reached the terminal, he looked back once, just once, at the plane that had carried him. Then he walked forward, not to let go, but to carry on. Have you ever carried something small that held someone big? Maybe it was a note, a photo, a pendant, something no one else would notice. But to you, it meant everything. Tell us in the comments, what do you carry and who gave it to you? Because sometimes the things we carry are the things that carry us. She liked that no one at school brought it up anymore unless she did. And she especially liked that she could write stories again in her notebook. Fiction, not policy memos. She was just beginning to feel like a kid again, which, in a way, made what happened next feel heavier. It came as an email. Subject line: Request International Youth Council seat nomination. Maya stared at it from her desk. The email was from a senior executive at a global aviation watchdog group. It said they were forming a youth advisory board, something symbolic at first, but with real input into training standards, accessibility policies, and passenger rights. They wanted Maya to take the inaugural seat. Harold hadn't mentioned it. Neither had Dana. This was outside the Clarion bubble now. This was international. At dinner that night, Maya pushed her food around her plate. Her mom noticed right away. "You've got that look," she said. "What look?" I'm carrying something and it's heavy and I haven't told anyone yet." "Look." Maya sighed, then told her. Her mom leaned back in her chair, quiet for a moment. "That's a big deal," she said finally. "I know. Do you want to do it?" "I don't know." Her mom reached over and gently turned Maya's fork upright. "Maybe ask yourself the same thing your grandfather asked you months ago. Not, what do they want from me? But, what do I want this to mean?" That night, Maya took a walk alone. She walked the blocks around their neighborhood. Slow, steady. A few porch lights flicked on. A dog barked from behind a fence. The breeze tugged at the sleeves of her hoodie. She thought about the question. What did she want this to mean? She'd never planned to be a voice. She hadn't chased recognition. All she wanted, at the beginning, was for someone to believe her. But now she saw what happened when people with good hearts were given the tools to do better. Passenger power was growing. Staff badges at airports read, "See you, with you." Kids traveling alone were using the QR support tool Maya helped create. Something had changed, and if her voice could help change more, could she really walk away from that? The next morning, Maya sat across from Harold at their favorite coffee shop downtown. She ordered the same as always, hot chocolate with cinnamon on top. He got his black coffee, no sugar. "I think I'm going to say yes," she said. He looked over his cup. I thought you might. I don't want it to be about me. He nodded. Then make sure it's not. She smiled. You make it sound so easy. It's not. But you've already done harder things. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Dana and Julio sent this, said you'd earned it. Inside was a sleek, laminated card. It read, Maya Ellington, founding contributor, Passenger Power Initiative, Global Youth Advisor, Clarion Equity Council. Her name, in black ink, on something official. Maya held it in both hands like it might float away if she let go. That evening, she drafted her response to the nomination committee. It wasn't long, just clear. She accepted, with the request that part of her role include spotlighting other young voices who hadn't gotten a seat yet. She ended the message with a sentence that had become second nature by now. I didn't ask to lead, but I'm learning that sometimes being seen means helping others be seen too. 3 days later, she received their reply. Unanimous approval. Welcome packet attached. First virtual council meeting scheduled for next week. And a message in bold at the top of the letter. We're not just listening, we're restructuring. Maya read it twice, then whispered to herself, good. The screen blinked to life exactly at 9:00 a.m. 12 squares lit up, one for each council member, scattered across different time zones and countries. The meeting was hosted by the International Air Passenger Advocacy Coalition, but it looked more like a global think tank than anything else. Maya adjusted her earbuds and sat up straighter. It was her first full meeting as an official youth advisor. She didn't speak right away. She listened. Each council member introduced a focus update, accessibility protocols, language inclusivity, staff fatigue metrics, migrant traveler protections. Some of the terms were technical. Some she had to quietly Google. Then, halfway through the agenda, the chairperson called her name. Ms. Ellington, we'd now like to hear your proposed recommendation. Maya's hand was steady on the unmute button. Thank you, she said. I'll keep this short. And she did. She proposed the creation of a first flight safe space, a physical or digital badge system designed to identify and support passengers flying alone for the first time, especially children, non-native speakers, or elderly travelers. Not to mark them as vulnerable, but to help crew notice them sooner and serve them better. It's not about making them stand out, she explained. It's about making sure they don't get overlooked. She paused, then added, because the hardest moments in air travel aren't always loud. Sometimes they're silent. Sometimes they look like a kid who doesn't know who to ask, or a grandmother who doesn't understand the signs. When she finished, the screen was quiet. Then someone unmuted. It was the CEO of a mid-sized European airline. That, he said, is exactly the kind of perspective we've been missing. More voices followed. A director from South Africa called the proposal brilliant in its simplicity. An airport design consultant said it was inexpensive, scalable, and overdue. Someone else asked if Maya would be willing to help develop the pilot test materials. She nodded. But to help crew notice them sooner and serve them better, course. Harold, who had been quietly watching from the other room, peeked in after she logged off. He raised an eyebrow. How'd it go? She didn't smile. She beamed. They're going to test it in 4 major airports. He chuckled. So, what's next? She looked out the window for a moment, then turned back to him, making sure it's not the last time they listen. Have you ever traveled alone, maybe for the first time, and wished someone had simply noticed? Not to pity you, not to rescue you, but just to see you. Tell us below, because sometimes the smallest gesture, eye contact, a kind question, a steady voice, can change how a journey feels. And stories like yours could help someone feel less invisible next time they fly.